this episode, we discuss the state of the Swimrun shoe in 2024, share our thoughts on choosing the right Swimrun shoe for your next race, and we give our rankings on the current shoes that are out there.
Welcome to the Low Tide Boys, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris, and this is episode 228 of the show. We've got a new addition to our Swimrun 101 series this week. In this episode, we discuss the state of the Swimrun shoe in 2024, share our thoughts on choosing the right Swimrun shoe for your next race, and we give our rankings on the current shoes that are out there. But it's important to note, Chipper, folks are interested, they can watch this on YouTube.
They can watch us on YouTube. Video. We also try to bring a visual element. We have a little show and tell as well. So if you are interested in seeing these shoes or the maybe elusive Studio G, i.e. my garage, you can check that out on YouTube. Head on over there, subscribe, smash the like button, all that stuff that the YouTubers tell you to. But
yes,
first, I think a good place to start and why we sort of have this as a Swimrun 101 is, I think, by and far the most popular question that we get, either that somebody asks us or is posted, is like, what shoes do I wear for Swimrun? Because the water and the running, I think it's a complex thing to wrap your head around sometimes, and you think there's probably some really specialty shoes out there.
Right.
We're here to
yeah, and if there's some
of that.
Yeah, and if there's some myth busting to be done, that we certainly felt this as well when we started in the sport back in 2018 was, oh man, you're gonna get blisters, shoes are gonna get all sloppy and soggy and like quick, get that thing going. And honestly, that really hasn't been our experience if you just can make some proper choices. So I think starting with, the state of the Swimrun shoe in 2024, we wish there were more specific Swimrun shoe options, I think it's safe to say, but here we are. But there's still a lot of great options, probably starting with what you already have in your house. So thinking about most of these races are going to happen on trails, so you want to index into a trail shoe, but even that's not required. Just something that has some lugs that can give you a little bit of traction depending on the terrain you're going to be on is good. I think beyond that, there's some general features which we'll talk about later in the show, but overall, I think there's, it isn't like, oh, I can't find a shoe to do the Swimrun in, because there are plenty of options.
Yeah, so like to very much just answer the question, oh, what shoe do I need for my first Swimrun? You don't need to go out and buy some special one or drop. You're certainly welcome to, and we like doing that ourselves, but the trail running shoe that you're already using is likely 95% going to work for you on that front. So we do kind of break it down into a little bit of things to consider for a shoe. So if you're like Chris and I, and you have a arsenal of different trail shoes for you got your thick boys, your Hokas, and maybe there's one that could be a little bit better for your options. So we'll kind of go through what Chris and I and other swim runners consider for choosing a shoe for your next swim run there.
Yeah, so I think a good place to start is, understanding that since most swim runs take place on trails, at least for the run portions, you probably want to have something with lugs on the sole. So again, going into your closet, wherever you keep your shoe locker, your foot locker, and just over and seeing what you have available is great. And then beyond that, I think you want to then start looking at the uppers. Do they drain well? Does it look like there's a lot of mesh for water to kind of flow in and out? You can do Chipper's favorite thing,
which is the bucket test.
The bucket test.
Yeah, so get a bucket or some bit of water. Take the shoes that you have in question of like, hey, are these going to work well for a swim run? Or is there a lot of padding that's going to absorb water when you're swimming? Dunk them in water. Hold them there for a minute or two. Bring them out. Kind of shake the water out, put them on your feet, and go for a run down the block and back. And I think pretty quickly you'll be able to understand, hey, are these potential shoes going to work, or are they going to hold on to a lot of water? How much of the the kind of stuff are you going to get when you're running around there? And I think pretty quickly, and from what we've seen in the general sort of trend in trail shoes in general, they're like pulling back on a lot of the fabrics and everything, and they're going with these really thin, kind of more mesh uppers. So we haven't seen this be too much of a problem, but the old bucket test is a great option.
Yep. And here's a bonus tip, because if the number one question we get is like, oh, what shoes do you wear for this? And the second question is always like, aren't you worried about getting blisters? And I have to tell you, there hasn't been one swim run where blisters or hot foot or chafing or anything like hot spots has been an option. And I think that's partly because I don't know where we got this advice, or maybe we actually came up with it ourselves, but wearing like a thin, moisture-wicking sock that's, has some compression in it almost acts like a second skin. And like I said, just not something we've experienced if you're wearing a right size shoe and you have like a thin sort of high nylon based sock.
Some synthetic sock. Obviously, a cotton sock is not going to do you any favors once it gets wet. It's going to be like a soggy diaper on your foot, and that's no good. I don't know how, but I think maybe you kind of had the knee-high socks, like the kind of compression socks, so that's just kind of what we wore, and it made sense. But yeah, we've used the Swiftwick socks. We really like those. The Aspires. They have,
different lengths,
no show all the way up to your knees, and then we've sort of moved off of those to the CEPs now.
Oh, have you moved up?
I have moved to SEP as well.
Nice.
That was a fear-based Attila purchase in Stockholm, mind you, before last year's Attila.
I was like, oh man, you should have told me. I had some back of the house.
So, getting the right sock is going to help you avoid blisters. There, obviously, make sure your shoe fits. The shoe fits you, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think
part of it.
Really, the shoes that we wear for swimrun that are good for swimrun, we also like wearing them for trail running too, and they're like some of our favorite trail running shoes. So that's how applicable sort of trail running shoes are for swimrun.
Yeah, and I think another piece of this, it's very user specific. So are you a minimal type of person? No problem. Are you a big boy, like to run on pillows type of person? No problem. The whole spectrum is available here for swimrun shoes. It's really about, hey, what do you think you can handle? If it's a super long race and you've never run in minimal shoes, maybe you shouldn't be wearing those for the race. But if you build up to it, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, it's really what you think is going to help you perform at your best, and not trying to sort of overthink and be like, well, I got to do what the pros are doing, or I got to use these specific swimrun shoes type stuff. Like, it's just not that. Don't overcomplicate.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, right. It's not that complex of a thing, and that's, I think, what we're really trying to put forward in this episode specifically is, obviously you can get into the nitty gritty. Oh, it's maybe more rooted trails, and you could tailor your footwear choice to the specific trails there, just like you would any trail race, and that's how we would apply that. And
we certainly do that. So on the like level of neuroses on this, like we're definitely indexing high.
Yeah, we're high.
So it's okay. Validate all
absolutely
all perspectives.
And we've done many miles of swim runs and many different types of shoes. So we're just gonna sort of talk through some of the ones that we're using. Chris has some new hotness that he's excited, and I'm excited for him to to bust out. But yeah, I mean, my first swim runs were in Hoka Speed Goats.
Yeah,
and
so
I use those for years.
Let me just pause you there.
Please.
So if you're listening to this, you might want to think about going to YouTube, because it's essentially show and tell time. So we did this on YouTube. Good so call. We can basically show what our shoes are. But I think with that.
Yeah. So for the first, I remember Casco Bay, Catalina, I was a Hoka Speed Goat guy for all my trail running, and they worked for swimrun, and I wore them for many swim runs, and I certainly see lots of swim runners still wear Hoka Speed Goats.
Sure, which made sense. I think for a very long period of our friendship, you've been sort of a maximal shoe guy. I think now you're kind of coming.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah,
you're coming back down.
But that's my own. That's my own.
Yeah, it's just your preference.
Yeah, that's my own preference.
So
adjusting.
So going back to what we were saying before, it's like, hey, that was his preference for running. So why reinvent it? Why put him in minimal shoes that are just going to make his dog start barking?
Woof.
So just use what he was used to and find something that works for swimrun.
Yeah. Where did you start your swim journey on? Unfortunately, a shoe that's no longer with us. Pour one out for the Solomons.
Yeah, the Salomon X-Lab Amphibs and the Amphib 2s. Those shoes were great lugs, great drainage. I wore those for our first Casco Bay. And then for Catalina, I wore I think we both wore the Speed Goat Evos.
Yep.
And then I ended up wearing the Amphibs for pretty much every race, even through the first time we did the World Championship, before switching.
I can't believe you.
I know.
I can't believe you did that.
I know, dude. It's crazy. Before switching pretty much exclusively to a shoe that, I don't know, I can't stop singing the praises of, is this Adidas Terex Speed Ultra. Unfortunately, no longer in production, but this was our shoe of the year for 22
years running.
2 years in a row, to the point where, I mean, I tried and failed, and I think Chipper's trying. Like, we were just trying to get someone at Adidas who designed the shoe. We just wanted to kind of let them know that they designed an amazing shoe for this super new sport.
You cracked the code for Swimrun shoes accidentally.
And like, I was like reaching out on LinkedIn, and it's like, hey, just want to give someone props, and they were like, oh, we don't even care.
Yeah, we were not a blip on their radar, unfortunately. But after sort of the Speed Goat era, if you will, I still in the Hoka family, I really like the Zanals, a little bit of sportier shoe. The Zanal ones, they have Vibram grip on the bottom, not as much maximal cushion, and I used those for several races, and they worked plenty well. I still really like running in those shoes for trails. They're kind of one of my go-tos there. They definitely work and get the job done for pretty much any swim run that we've come across in our travels there. And that's about the time, Chris, when you switched over to the Adidas Terex Speed Ultras there, and you haven't really looked back since then.
I really haven't. I mean, I just think they're great shoes. Unfortunately, they're no longer in production, but there are some brand new Adidas Terex that are called a Gravic Speed Ultra, which actually have like a carbon fiber plating in them.
Oh my word!
So we just got these. They very much feel.
This is the new hotness in the trail
They
world.
very much feel like a super shoe in terms of how squishy it is and sort of the rocking. So very interesting. Similar upper where it looks like it drains super well. Minimal design on that, but I haven't swim ran in them yet, so TBD. Stay tuned for a more detailed review on these. But initial impressions, I mean, very interesting. I can imagine this being a very interesting shoe for the World Championship, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Like Orna on these.
You can be doing that. And sort of a footwear choice. When the first time we did the World Champs, I think a lot of the feedback that we were getting from the American racers that have done it is that, man, these rocks in Sweden are like none other. They're very slick. You got to check out these VJ shoes, was what we heard. And
right. And we were definitely, if I could speak for you, Chipper, we were in the throw money at the problem phase of training.
We're in that phase a lot during the training cycle, unfortunately, it feels like. But so I've experimented with several different pairs. Again on YouTube, I have the VJ Max here, the V1s. And I will say, and I don't think Chris will refute this point, but if you are for some reason like, I need the best grip out there and I want to be sticking on everything, the
like
VJ grip is unlike none other. I put it up against anything. And
like if you're for some reason super paranoid about slipping and like breaking your coccyx or something, like this will mitigate that paranoia for sure.
And so I raced Attila in the 22 season with the VJ Max Ultra 2s. So it's their kind of most cushioned shoe. Still pretty. It's not a Speed Goat type of thickness. They're great grip on that, and it has a rock plate in it. So it has a little bit of a plate, so it kind of covers up some of the underfoot feel of like a sharp rock or something. It kind of blocks a little bit of that out. I've raced in those. That's kind of been my go-to shoe recently, between that and the Adidas Terex there. But yeah, and VJ has some new shoes that we're looking to try out there. They have the Max 2 there, and then they also have a newer kind of racier shoe that we're looking to get our hands on to try that out, for the show.
Yeah,
for the show.
I mean, at least that's what we tell our wives.
That's what we tell the wives.
Now there is one shoe that's actually a swim run shoe that looks like no other shoe out there.
Yeah.
This is the Vivo Barefoot Hydra ESC. This shoe got super high ratings from us in a gear talk that we did a year ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah. And Vivo Barefoot, they're a minimal footwear company. So no drop, not really any cushion. They use a really solid Michelin bottom outer on this. I mean, this is the only shoe that we're aware of that is specifically made for swim run. It has the whole sock like texture, but it is that minimal aspect. So if you're into that sort of thing, and and they're also very environmentally forward company as well. They're pretty.
If you bury it biodegrades in like 20 years,
something like that. Yeah,
it's crazy.
But yeah, if you are barefoot minded or you're interested in that, definitely check out the Hydra ESCs. We did a whole episode on those, so you can go check that out from a gear talk. But high ratings across the board on that shoe.
Certainly. So I think so those are some of the shoes that we've used, maybe all of them. So finally, I think what we wanted to do is really give our sort of our ranking on what we think are the best swim run shoes for 2024 so far. Still early in the year, but since this is also like an SEO play. So I think it probably makes sense to break it down into a couple different categories because, again, as we mentioned, no shoe is going to be perfect for everything. It's going to be very user specific. But I think some things to think about is the race going to be super long? Is the terrain going to be super technical? And these are some things that you'll want to take into account. Like if it's going to be, for example, Whistler, it's mostly going to be on fire roads and sort of gravel trails, maybe even some paved sort of bike path. Probably get away with a road shoe there, but you probably don't need something that's going to be super luggy because entrance and exits aren't going to be slippery or slick or, too technical.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can throw out a couple recommendations for each sort of category that we have here. So for those long races, I guess long's a relative term. If it's long to you and you feel like, oh, my feet are going to get beat up after 20Ks, then that's your long race. If it's a 70K distance, then that's the long race to you. But specifically for me, I used the Hoka Tecton X for last year's Attila. In terms of like cushioning and having that like real Hoka plush feeling, checked the box on that. I will say the grip on that one, I wasn't giving it the highest marks ever compared to the VJ. I was slipping around a little bit.
I wasn't giving it high marks just from looking at it. I was like, I'm not liking this.
Chris was stressing out on that one, but I think if it's not the most technical race and it's something, and the Tecton X does have the carbon plate in there as well. So if you're looking for a little bit extra spring and cushion, and it's not the most technical or you don't need the best grip, I think the Tecton X is a pretty good choice there.
Yeah, I think again, long races, as Chipper mentioned, is kind of what you're used to. I think you can get away using the Adidas Terex Speed Ultras.
Yeah.
That's what I used in the World Championship last year and basically every race last year without any issues. I think the VJ Max Ultras are also a good choice because they do have a lot of cushioning. And basically, probably most of the Hoka shoes. Yeah,
you could we could very easily recommend the Speed Goats here as well. I know people that race in the Torrent 2s, which is kind of their mid, not lower, a little bit less stack height than the Speed Goats, but not as thin as the Zenals. So I think for those long races, if Hoka sort of is up your alley from a trail running perspective, it's probably going to do the job for you.
It's a good place to start for sure. Yeah. Now, for technical terrain, I think the same advice we just gave for long races applies, but you probably want to over-index a little bit more on the sole. So you want to make sure that, and again, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see what I'm describing here. You want to make sure that you just have enough lugs and things on the bottom to make it work. Now, these Adidas ones, even though the lugs seem relatively small, because of the pattern, works really
It's a mountain bike.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Mountain bike modeled after mountain bike tire. And I think this is a good point, Chris, to mention as well is you want to look at your shoes, and if you got some miles on them, you also want to make sure that the lugs are still there. They haven't been worn out. Maybe it's a time to kind of bust out a fresher pair to make sure you do have those fresh lugs in there. I will say there are some shoes out there that we've seen. What are they? They have like almost like a soccer cleat big lug on there, like a
ice
6
bugs.
mil. Yeah. Those are like kind of, they look more like cleats almost. I would say those are not really something that we see that much around. And I don't think they're particularly useful in terms of like traction or grip there. So, a grain of salt with those. We wouldn't really recommend going for the like super luggy.
I think like
style.
crazy lugs probably aren't necessary. I think it'd be more about, do you have good grip? Do you trust? This is something that Marcus Barton mentioned. I can't even remember on what episode, but just like trusting your shoe when you put it down that it's going to stick. That's really what it's about. Because if you're going down a slick downhill, the last thing you want is to not trust where you put your foot.
Yeah. That when he has mentioned that's definitely stuck with me as well. It's like when you're leaping to the rock that you're hoping to stick the landing on, you better be damn sure and trust that your shoe's actually going to stick when you get on there, because the worst feeling is like not grabbing traction when you're on the down.
Yeah.
There. And then technical terrain, as we mentioned before, any of the VJ shoes are certainly known for their grip. I think their slogan is best grip on the planet. It might be a little bit of puffery, but we'll certainly co-sign on that. So I think any of the VJ models will work for that technical terrain there, and that could be
Certainly.
slippery entrances and exits on rocks, or kind of more of like almost like a rooted situation. I'm thinking like some of the descents in Swimrun NC in North Carolina, like, you really kind of got to be careful where you're going down there. You don't want to, you got to make sure you have good grip and traction when you're going down there.
For sure. And then I think finally, what we would say is the best all-around shoe. It's probably going to come as no surprise. It's really this no longer in production Adidas Terex Speed Ultra. You can still find them online if you're feel like you need to get your hands on them. They do have an updated model that doesn't have the carbon plate. I think it's just called the Adidas Terex Agravic Speed. We haven't, we were like, hey, we're going to go for, might as well go carbon
Might
fiber.
as well go for the carbon.
For the show, right?
For the show. And I think, if we bust out our crystal balls here, where do you kind of see, or where do you think where the market is going with the shoes? I think certainly from the, there's no swim run shoe market. There's a trail running shoe market. And we're seeing kind of some of the technology from the road super shoes making their way to the trail shoes, which is what the Adidas have here. Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think that on some level, it's like disc brakes on bikes. It's like, oh, well, how do we get people to buy all sorts of new stuff? Okay, now we're all going to disc brakes, and now you got to get a new bike and stuff, and you can't like upgrade your components, so you got to like update the whole thing. I think it's TBD whether carbon fiber. I mean, and there are carbon fiber plates in the Hoka Tecton X, and Max and Hugo used them for the World Champ. I almost said World Cup, for the World Championship. So so it's doable to race long distances in them. Well, I think it's just a matter of whether is that actually super necessary.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, and again, it's definitely a throw money at the problem type of thing there, where you could be dropping a couple $100 on some new shoes just to have the new hotness. But this is the sickness that we have. So I think we pretty much covered it. If you're getting into Swimrun, this is your first one, you don't need to go out and break the bank. Use what you got already. What are your favorite trail shoes? Those will work for a Swimrun. If you are looking to, up your game a little bit, or you want a good excuse to spend some money, then there's plenty of options. There's plenty of options out there for you there. And then obviously, pair it with the right socks. And I think you'll be in a good place there. But as usual, we're always happy to field these questions, even though we
just try to answer.
Even though we try to answer them all, we're happy to answer your individual questions or thoughts on different shoes. And if you're trying out some of these super shoes as well, or have specific thoughts, we love hearing from everyone else as well. So be sure to reach out, lowtideboys@gmail.com, lowtideboys.com, obviously our YouTube channel there. And anything else?
I don't know. See you out there.
See you out there, I guess. Over and out. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating or review, since that's the best way to help other people discover the show and the sport of swim run.
Check out our website, lowtideboys.com. That's boys with a Z, for swimrun resources, including gear guides, tips, how-to videos, and so much more. Make sure to check out our meme page at The Low Tide Boys on Instagram. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, send us a DM or email us at lowtideboys@gmail.com.
We'd like to thank Riding Easy Records for our show music, and of course our wives for their support and tolerance of our swim run and other activities.
Lots of activities.
Lots of activities.
Finally, you can support our efforts on Patreon. Until next time, get out there and go for a swim.
Then a run.
And then a swim.
Then another run.
Then another swim.
Then run some more.
Just keep going.
Let's go.
And then stop at some point because,
And fuel. Don't forget to fuel.
Gotta fuel
of course, yes.